From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And here's what's coming up. K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek will share the latest thinking on combating pinkeye in cattle herds. That'll center on face fly control and vaccine use. He advises you producers to watch closely for the outward signs of pinkeye development now. Then the team from the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State take on several cattle management topics as part of the recent BCI Cattle Chat podcast. Bob Larson, Brad White, Bob Weaber, and Dustin Pendell talk about, among other things, checking the status of those breeding bulls. And on this week's horticulture segment, then, K-State's Raymond Cloyd takes a look at several landscape insect issues right now. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Good to have you aboard once again. As we get a chance to visit once more with the director of the Production Animal Field Investigations Unit at K-State's Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, Gregg Hanzlicek is along our way once again to talk more bovine health management with us. And what we'll pick up on today, Gregg, is a topic that our cattle producers are unfortunately quite well acquainted with, but we learn something new every year, it turns out, about pinkeye disease in cattle. Something we all know and are familiar with, though, is that this is a quite costly disease to the industry.
Absolutely. Has been for a long time, and I think the last estimate that I saw was it cost the cow-calf industry of the United States $150 million per year. And that's we do know that calves, when they get pink eye and they're out on pasture, their rate of gains are less. We know that calves with the scars from pink eye are discounted at the sale barn. So there's a whole bunch of things that are going on there that reduce the economic value of the calves due to pink eye or IBK.
So what to blame for pink eye? Well, you say that, and this may be unknown to a lot of folks, multiple organisms can create this condition.
We think so. We do know that there's one that's called Moraxella bovis. It has, through experiments, been shown to definitely cause pink eye. We have, in other places, have actually found other organisms, another Moraxella, which is called bovoculi, and then two mycoplasmas, and IBR, the IBR, the virus that we normally associate with abortions or respiratory issues. With the testing that we do on swabs from calves with pink eye, we're finding all 5 of those organisms. And so, again, it's never been proven those other organisms actually cause the disease or associated with it, but we're beginning to believe that they probably do participate in the disease.
So somehow those organisms are activated to lead to the pink eye condition, and explain how that goes.
Yeah, that's a great point. Except for the IBR, those other organisms are all bacteria, and they're normally in the eyes, and they live on the whites of the eyes, underneath the eyelids, in the fluids. They cannot attach to the cornea, which is where the pink eye problem is. It's an ulcer on the cornea. Those bacteria cannot attach to that cornea unless something breaks the integrity of the cornea. And then they start growing there, and then that's when they cause the problem. And
that cornea can be compromised any number of ways, you say.
Absolutely, and the things we think about are dust. It can either be a dusty dry lot situation. It can be hay dust. If we're feeding ground hay, the dust can get underneath the eyelids and lacerate the cornea. This time of year, we typically start seeing it when the grass, especially like our bromes and things, start having seed heads. As those animals graze, those seed heads lacerate the eyes and let the bacteria in. So there's multiple ways, but it's important that we realize that it does take something to break the integrity of the cornea to start a pink eye outbreak.
But often folks will point to flies and their activity around the head of cattle as a culprit here. Is that in fact one of the causes?
Absolutely, and it's face flies, our horn flies and stable flies and those other flies that are important for other diseases. They're blood feeders, but it's the face flies, and those are the flies that producers will notice that are around the eyes. They feed on the nose and around the eyes. They're actually sucking up in their mouth parts the liquid that the eyes produce, and their mouth parts unfortunately have these hairs, and these hairs can lacerate the cornea while they're feeding. And so if we have a lot of face flies feeding, before long that cornea is compromised, and the bacteria that's there all the time has the opportunity to attach, and then that's when we get the outbreaks.
And you make the distinction between the face fly and the horn fly here. For when we think about fly control, face flies can be a little more challenging, you say.
Absolutely, and that's a great point too, is that with our insecticide ear tags, you would think that we would have good control of face flies because they're close to the ear tags. And experiments have shown by using dyes in these tags that the problem is the face fly and it's the female face fly that does this, comes in and feeds off the eye and then leaves immediately. So they're not exposed to the insecticide for long periods of time. Like our horn flies, they're on the animal almost their entire life, except for to lay eggs. And so it's more of an exposure than it is anything else. So our face fly control is not very good, but we still need to try to control those flies.
But you point out likewise, if one's using insecticidal ear tags, good stewardship is equally, if not more important, when it comes to trying to hold down the pinkeye via face fly control.
Absolutely. Even though I say we don't have good control, we still have control especially if we use our insecticide ear tags. But it's important that we reduce the amount of resistance that we're seeing face flies have towards especially our pyrethroids, and we are seeing resistance. So when producers use ear tags, one of the things we want them to do is to put 2 ear tags or better than 1 in the adults. And then if they are in situations where they're having a problem, putting 1 in a calf is not a bad idea also. But to rotate the ingredients every year. And so our recommendation would be to use a pyrethroid 1 year, and then for the next 2 years you use an organophosphate. And there's a 3 rotation ingredient that you could use. It'd be 1 year pyrethroid, 1 year organophosphate, and then the 3rd year would be one of our macrocytic lactones ingredients, just to prevent the resistance to the face flies.
All right. Well, then what about larvicidal products for face fly control? Are they effective here?
They are, and that's because the female face fly will only lay her eggs in fresh manure. And so our larvicides are effective against face flies. Now, some of that depends on how well your neighbor's controlling face flies and those kind of things too, because they do fly a fair distance. But absolutely, our ear tags, our foggers, our back rubbers, and then the larvicides, they are effective as effective as we can against face flies.
And, of course, everyone wants to know if there is a vaccine protocol that will work in this instance, too.
Absolutely. And there's multiple commercial vaccines on the market. None of them are going to contain all those organisms we talked about. And most of them are just going to contain one. And sometimes these vaccines are effective if the strain of the bacteria that's in the vaccine is closely related to the strain that's in the herd. If they're not closely related, we probably don't get much cross protection. That's one reason why people say Pinkeye vaccine doesn't work in my herd, or they'll say, you know what, we used this product for a couple of years, now we're not having any success. Well, that's probably because these bacteria have basically mutated, and so they're a different strain, and so we're not getting the cross protection.
You brought up something else earlier before we came on the air, too, that there's an option that some producers are eyeing, a specific herd-tailored vaccine?
Absolutely, and it's called autogenous vaccine, and the process of that is that the veterinarian will come out and sample eyes and send the swabs to a laboratory. The laboratory will identify what organisms are there, and then those organisms can be sent to a commercial vaccine company, and they will put all the bacteria types that are on that operation into one vaccine, and that's called an autogenous one. And they can be very effective, but again, sometimes they're not, because the bacteria may have changed by the time we isolated the organism to when the vaccine is made, which is 3 to 6 months down the road. So it's not a bad thing to do, but it's not a win-all for everybody.
That lag time is to be considered here for sure. Then, so that's prevention. But upon contracting pink eye, treatment alternatives, and there is a positive here, Gregg. You say, in that there are injectables out there that can help.
Absolutely, there's several products out there that are labeled for pink eye treatment, and a lot of them are very effective. Like most of our diseases, really the key is finding those calves early, or those cows, and getting the antibiotic into them early. Highly recommend that work with their veterinarian on picking the appropriate product.
And to add to the healing process as well as the comfort of the animal, the eye patch can be very useful here.
Most people are going to recommend that we do put an eye patch on there, because even as humans, any of you have ever had pink eye, you know that sunlight is very, very painful. And so as more of an animal welfare and to prevent flies from feeding on the guy, putting a patch on is a good thing to do. We'll caution producers to, even though we say treatments are very effective, sometimes they fail. And so if they put an eye patch on, we highly recommend after about 3 to 4 days that they look under that eye patch to make sure that the healing process has started, because sometimes we have to change treatment regimens. And if we don't look and we wait until the patch falls off, sometimes we have an eye that's no longer functional when we could have treated it earlier.
All right. Again, visit with your veterinarian for all kinds of input on dealing with pink eye, but it begins with watching for the condition, Gregg, and that's also important here.
Absolutely. And early signs of pink eye are going to be just a watering of the eye, just excess tears on the side of the face, and then kind of goes into another stage where they'll start holding their eyelids more closed because the sunlight's painful. And then eventually you'll see the ulcers on there. So again, yeah, it's looking at those animals frequently and looking for pink eye problems.
As always, Gregg, thanks for the comments right here.
My pleasure.
He's over from the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory here at K-State. Gregg Hanzlicek, once again, with the latest on pink eye management in cattle, out on grass or otherwise during the summertime. And we'll be back with more on Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, amber alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Agriculture Today continues now, and to follow up our conversation with K-State's Gregg Hanzlicek, we'll draw now from another Cattle Chat podcast from the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State. The regular panel was aboard for this one: veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson, cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber, and livestock economist Dustin Pendell. And they took up in order a mid-breeding season status check of bulls, monitoring weather and pasture conditions, and a high-profile beef genetics meeting coming up that all of you producers can access for free online. Brad starts it off.
A lot of people have turned bulls out. We've talked before about doing a BSE, or breeding soundness exam, for those bulls. What about after I turn him out, Bob? Because what should I think about when I get those bulls out in the pasture? Are there anything I should continue to monitor?
Yeah, when we do a breeding soundness exam ahead of the breeding season, a lot of times I'll talk to the producer about how important it is to continue to monitor those bulls during the breeding season. So I don't mean bring them back in and do another semen evaluation. I mean, as they're out working in the pasture, really keep a good eye on them. And if you really think about it, they should be the busiest in the first month of the breeding season. That's when, nobody's pregnant yet the first couple of weeks until they get them pregnant. And so there should be a lot of cows coming into heat. He's going to be busy, and so it's a good time to be watching him. And again, part of the problem is, and we try to emphasize this as we're doing our pre-breeding season examination, is I'm going to look at his feet, I'm going to look at his joints and things like that to assess him while he's in the squeeze chute or walking around the vet clinic. But I can't really assess that very well until he's out on a pasture, covering ground. And so I'm looking for things like
and stuff happens, right? Stuff's going to happen after he's out there.
He's a bull. I mean, let's just face it. He's going to try to break something, or something's going to try to break him and stuff. So, yeah, a perfectly sound bull can have problems soon after I've turned him out. It depends on how well he wants to behave. But and so things like lameness, feet and legs, he tries to mount, and another bull beats on him while he's mounting a cow. You can have knee problems, torn ligaments. There's just so many different ways a bull can get messed up that you need to be watching them.
There's a lot of ways they can get messed up, but when you check them, I can see most of the things that might happen to him, right? I mean, Weber, what do you look for when you go out and check the bulls during the season?
Yeah, when I go out and check cows, salt and mineral flies, that kind of stuff, I always go try and find the bull and watch him walk around first. That's, one, if he's not with the cows, that's a red flag, particularly early in the morning or late in kind of dusk time, because that's when cows typically show estrus. So
time, yeah,
if he's not out checking out the girls, then something's up.
So you're saying the bull has to be with the cows for this to be the is that your quote for this one?
Generally, I think that's a pretty safe assumption. I think the other thing is, if he is laying down when you go find him, that's another red flag, unless it's the middle of the day and he's shaded up. Get him up and just walk him around a little bit. And, of course, be careful, right? Sometimes these mature bulls can be kind of cranky, cantankerous buggers. So if you can get him up and watch him walk from the comfort of your ATV or pickup or horse, any of those is good. But get him up and walk him around. Usually if they've got any kind of lameness issue, as soon as they get up, if they've got something that's hurting them, they'll be ouchy on it. And watch that. And that's usually the biggest things. Other conditions, if bad eyes, if they've got a case of pinkeye or something, that'll be readily obvious as well.
The other thing that I'll do, Weber, and you probably do this too, is And I agree with you, kind of start early in the morning or late in the evening. You got more activity, more likely to get some breeding going on. What we expect is about, and of course the cows don't read the textbook, but about 5% of the cows that aren't pregnant yet should be in heat about each day, about that number. And so at the beginning of the breeding season, he ought to be, if he's out there with, 30 cows, there's a couple cows in heat a day. Now, as you get later in the breeding season, after that first 21 days, after that first month, if he's been doing his job and getting cows pregnant, that number should drop down a lot. And so if you're into when most of the cows should be pregnant, or at least half the cows should be pregnant, that number drops in half. And so you're talking about 2% or less of the cows in heat each day. And if you're a month into the breeding season and still seeing a lot of riding and a lot of heats, that would be a time to check on that bull. And maybe even bring him in and have a veterinarian check on him, but for sure, take a good look at him.
Yeah, I think particularly, we talk a lot about momentum and calving distribution, and for those herds that are, really front-loaded by 30 to 45 days, we should have, almost all those cows covered by that point. And so, but if you've got a really spread out calving distribution, you'll see more activity later in the breeding season than one of those front-loaded herds. But still, it ought to drop precipitously as you get through the middle part of that.
As those cows get pregnant, they shouldn't be coming back into heat.
Yep.
That's one of the best signs, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a good sign.
Write that one down, right?
And that leads us to our BCI Cattle Chat checklist for this week, which is our top items to check for the in-season breeding soundness exam of the bull.
All right, number 6 is monitor those cows if they're showing, more of them are showing signs of heat later in the breeding season than you would expect.
Number 5, you want to track the body condition of the bull with a focus on the yearlings.
Number 4, assess that the bull is moving around normally.
Number 3, check the vision of your bull and make sure that he can see okay and doesn't have lesions from pink eye or some other ailment.
All right, number 2, look along the bottom midline of the bull and make sure there's no swellings in there indicating an injury.
Yeah, number 1, observe the attitude of the bull and make sure that he's engaged in the social activities of that herd and that he's present and accounted for with the cows.
Another area we wanted to talk about today is predicting the weather, monitoring. How do we figure out what's going on before it becomes a problem? And our goal here, as we talk about some of these things, we're very dependent on weather patterns, the amount of forage, especially on our cow-calf operations. That changes year to year, and it may change just in timing a little bit, or it may change in quantity of production. So what do you guys do? How do you try to manage that? Weber, I'm going to start with you because you manage the purebred operation here, and forage is not always the same every year. What are some of the things that you look at and monitor to see what kind of year it's going to be?
The website I use a lot is just the Drought Monitor website that gives sort of a running or ongoing look at drought conditions around the United States. And I watch here close, but I also kind of keep an eye on what's going on around the rest of the country because that influences a fair bit of sort of the future market conditions that we might experience in the beef sector. So very western Kansas is in a pretty severe drought in a small area. So yeah, I like the Drought Monitor website a lot.
And then the other one is just to get out there and monitor for yourself and kind of set some, I was trained by some folks that were pretty helpful at, set some guidelines. I'm going to check the 1st of May, the 1st of June, whatever, and really go out there and see how tall the grass is. So 2 things, monitoring how much rainfall we've had up to that point and what's our grass production like? Because, it does change a lot from year to year, and it's hard for me to remember if I don't see it, write it down.
We'll put that website. There's another one that I saw a news article on the other day, which is called GrassCast, which predicts in a region of the country, predicts the forage based on the previous weather pattern in the past year. And we'll link all of those websites on our show notes for this show. Weber, I know you've been working on Beef Improvement Federation. The meeting's coming up soon, but it's going to be online. You tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. So we had scheduled a great meeting in Florida in early June, so the 8th through the 12th. And because of the pandemic, we've canceled the face-to-face part of that meeting, but we've moved it entirely online. So, of course, we won't have the great tours and some of the social interaction that we're accustomed to at the face-to-face meeting, but most of the content will be available online, and registration, if you just visit beefimprovement.org, it's going to be free to attend. We do need to get you registered to get the appropriate Zoom credentials in your hands to join that meeting, but it'll be all online June 8th through 12th, registration this week.
You said it's free to attend?
It's free to attend this year, yeah. Great sponsorship from a number of our partners in the genetics world and pharmaceutical world and breed associations and so forth. Everybody's really excited about the opportunity this presents for both domestic and our U.S. and international attendees. And yeah, we're pretty excited. It's been well received so far.
One of the best meetings of the year, in my opinion. And I know Weber is actively involved with that group, so I don't want to compliment him too much, but it really is a great meeting to get to.
That's K-State's Bob Weaber, Dustin Pendell, Bob Larson, and Brad White. The BCI Cattle Chat podcast is archived for your listening at ksubci.org. That's ksubci.org. We'll return shortly on Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here, and moving on now to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the USDA has revised its previous forecast for Chinese purchases of U.S. agricultural products during this 2020 fiscal year. Here's more on that from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
This fiscal year, China will likely buy more U.S. agricultural products than this past fiscal year, but events over the last few months have
slowed their demand for imports to a certain degree.
And Agriculture Department Chief Economist Rob Johansson says that's reflected in USDA's latest trade projections for this fiscal year's Chinese purchases of U.S. ag products. Johansson says back in February, in dollar terms,
we had forecast them at $14 billion from the U.S., up from $10 billion in fiscal 19, and we have them at 13 now, $13 billion, so up from last year, but down $1 billion from February.
But these projections are for fiscal year 2020, which began October 1st, ends September 30. So Johansson says you really cannot connect those projections to the Phase 1 trade agreement commitments, which are on a calendar year basis. And, of course, we are not even halfway through calendar year 2020. Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Two important new developments in the courts of high relevance to agriculture. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit issued a decision yesterday vacating the registrations of 3 dicamba herbicides, XtendiMax, Ingenia, and Fexapan. The ruling does not appear to include Syngenta's Tavium dicamba herbicide, but this ruling has enormous implications for farmers this summer, given that roughly 60 million acres of dicamba-tolerant cotton and soybeans were slated for 2020 planting, with the expectation that producers could use dicamba over the top for weed control. When asked what this ruling means for the legal use of dicamba here in 2020, an EPA spokesperson told DTN that the EPA is currently reviewing the court decision and will move promptly to address the court's directive. At least one dicamba registrant, Bayer, has vowed to fight the ruling and to try to mute its effect on farmers this growing season. The Ninth Circuit's ruling came from a lawsuit brought against the EPA and Monsanto in 2017 by a coalition of farming environmental groups by name, the National Family Farm Coalition, the Center for Food Safety, the Center for Biological Diversity, and the Pesticide Action Network. The lawsuit alleges that the EPA violated both the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act as well as the Endangered Species Act when it first registered dicamba for use on dicamba-tolerant crops back in 2017. Now, in its ruling, the Ninth Circuit ruled that the EPA did violate FIFRA with the dicamba registrations. The judges, though, did not rule on the lawsuit's Endangered Species Act claim. And a federal grand jury has indicted the president and CEO of Pilgrim's Pride, along with 3 other poultry executives, with 1-count indictments for conspiring to fix prices and rig bids for broiler chickens. A grand jury for the U.S. District Court in Denver handed down the indictments against Jason Penn, the president and CEO of Pilgrim's Pride, along with Roger Austin, a former vice president for Fresh Food Service at Pilgrim's Pride. Also indicted were executives for Claxton Poultry Farms in Georgia, Mikkel Fries and Scott Brady. The Justice Department noted that the 4 executives are the first to be charged in price fixing and bid rigging in the broiler chicken industry in an ongoing criminal investigation. The department stated multiple federal agencies continue to collaborate on an investigation into the industry. The indictment states the 4 executives, together with their co-conspirators, operated in a network of suppliers to suppress and eliminate competition through rigging bids and fixing prices and price-related terms for broiler chicken products sold in the U.S. Colorado-based Pilgrim's Pride, one of the largest poultry companies in the country, Brazilian-based JBS owns more than 78% of the common stock in Pilgrim's Pride. Claxton is a family-owned operation based in Georgia, but is listed as one of the 100 largest poultry companies globally. Next up on Agriculture Today is this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. And waiting with that, as always, is Gregg Hanzlicek. Greg?
Nathan Holmes is joining us. He is a graduate of Wamego High School, but he also received the State FFA Oil Crop Proficiency Award that's sponsored by Kansas Soybeans. And let's talk about your Supervised Agricultural Experience program to which you received the award. What did your program entail?
When I started back in 2017, I had a labor agreement with my parents on cleaning up a plot of 1 acre. And then the following year, I asked my neighbor to the west, seeing that how well I cleaned up our plot, and he just rented me the 2 acres on a labor agreement also to clean up around his field. Year after that, 97 acres came up for sale, dry land, and I applied for beginning farmers loan through the USDA, and they said they could sponsor half of the loan. I need to find another lender. I went with Farm Credit, and that year planted soybeans on the hill ground, and also rented 25% of an irrigated 80-acre tract from my parents that year.
So what were some of your roles and responsibilities and management decisions in this case in relating to the award?
Going out and checking for weeds and pest control out. And on one of our farms, on the 80-acre tract, went out there and scoured. Since it was wet last year, water had backed in to the ditch and came over onto the field and had a little bit of sudden death syndrome there. And we had to respray that, checking for making sure the growth of the plant is healthy.
With all that happening, how did that crop do last year?
On both, they went 53.2 bushels per acre, but separating them out, my hill ground went 54 bushels per acre, and the 80-acre irrigated tract went 53 bushels per acre.
That is Nathan Holes, a graduate of Wamego High School and the recipient of the State FFA Proficiency Award in Fiber and Oil Crop Production. He joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Gregg Hanzlicek there. Greg, many thanks. We'll break away one more time. Then when we come back, this week's K-State Horticulture segment. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so stay a minimum of 6 feet away from others and stay home if you can. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This Agriculture Today comes to a close with our weekly horticulture segment. On those insects that are active in home landscapes right now, once more with us, Raymond Cloyd, horticultural entomologist with K-State Research and Extension. And at long last, you're going to give the go sign, Raymond, to folks who have been asking for weeks now about when is the time to treat bagworms on landscape evergreens. And yes, they can begin, you say.
Yep, the checker flag has been dropped, and it's time to go. It is. We've already got indications. The very small bags are out there. How do you do it? Well, there are a number of products at this stage of the game we like to recommend. One of them is it's called Bacillus thuringiensis kiristaki, and then the other one's got active ingredient called spinosad. These are stomach poisons, and they're very effective against the young bagworms or the caterpillars in the bags. You want to start spraying about once a week when you see them for about 4 weeks, one spray per week. And that should really impact the populations, Eric, overall. Now, later on, we'll talk about when the bags are bigger, but I want to focus in right now on using either one of those products because both of those are safer to humans and others, and they're also less harmful to the environment, right, including birds and toads and lizards and good stuff like that, and also the beneficial insects. So you want to spray up once a week for about 4 to 5 weeks, and that should keep those populations from getting big caterpillars.
One of the keys to bagworm control, aside from the multiple applications that are required here, thorough coverage of the plant as best one can, right, Raymond?
Yeah, that is correct, Eric. You want to get especially on conifers, they have a thick canopy, so it's important to get inside the canopy where bagworms can feed. And like you said, multiple applications. Remember, the eggs don't all hatch per se at once, and also you get ballooning occurring. That is bagworms coming in on another area and landing on your plant. So that's why it's really important to make these repeat applications over a period of time.
Bagworm activity on those evergreens. Get after it now. and apparently quite active in our landscapes now. Mosquitoes, they'll be around for a while, unfortunately, for the balance of this summer.
Well, mosquitoes, and we did have some rain, and of course, mosquitoes breed in stagnant water, those that you find in old tires, pet dishes, bird baths, gutters. So it's always important to remove all stagnant water. That's where the larva of the mosquito breeds. Most of the life stage is actually in the water, but I have seen some adults out there. I believe one of them was the Asian tiger mosquito. As you know, many mosquitoes, we have vector viruses, dengue fever, yellow fever, Zika, things like that. So how do you deal with it? Well, you put on a repellent, things like DEET, Cardian. You can put permethrin on your clothes, but don't put on your skin. It's a repellent, but also an insecticide. And then you just, if you have water areas where fish and other wildlife are at, you can use these mosquito dunks, and they contain a very similar bacteria that we use for bagworms. In this case, it's Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, and that is a bacteria that only kills mosquito larvae or blackfly larvae. And so you can buy the dunks or the flakes. You put them on the pond and won't do anything to your fish or pets. It'll only kill the mosquito larvae. So those are some of the procedures that people can take, Eric, to avoid, not eliminate, but avoid getting bit by mosquitoes. Yeah.
Aphids on landscape ornamentals, and you say there is an assortment of these bugs out there, Raymond.
Yeah, Eric, we've seen them on maple, on spirea, a whole slew of different aphid species. And of course, aphids attack the terminal growth. That's where a lot of the nutrition is at. And, this stage of the game, they're very easy to deal with. Just take a forceful water spray and then blast them off or dislodge them. They will not come back. It breaks their mouth parts out. So really, you don't need to spray and then insecticide. Just take the forceful water spray and knock them off. And if you do that a couple times a week or whenever they're present, that will alleviate having to spray with an insecticide.
Are they readily evident? Can they be spotted, generally speaking now, relatively easily?
Yeah, they tend to feed on the terminal growth, Eric, or leaf undersides, and they're very gregarious, meaning there's usually lots of them on a plant. Just get really close, and you'll see these insects with tubes in their abdomen. We call them cornicles. Just get a hose with a nozzle like you'd wash your car and just go around the entire plant and dislodge them off the plant.
Very good. So watch for aphids, and they'll be around for a while yet. They tend to spend a fair part of the summer out and about, Raymond?
They do, depending on environmental conditions. Right now, there's a lot of new plant growth occurring on trees and shrubs and vegetables. When that occurs, that's when we typically have problems with aphids, Eric.
So tell us, Raymond, about something else you say you're hearing from homeowners. They're bringing up these galls that are showing up on landscape tree leaves. And you say these are likely inflicted by insects as well.
Well, what we're seeing are galls, and one of the classic ones are these deep red galls are on the surface of the leaves. Remember, the gall is not going to kill the tree. It just makes it look different. And there are two organisms that cause these. One of them are eriophyid mites. Eriophyid mites are cigar-shaped looking mites. You can't see them with the naked eye. You need a microscope. And they reside in these galls. And again, they're not going to kill the tree because the gall former needs the plant. And then aphids, which we talked about previously, are also responsible for causing certain galls. Again, they're not going to kill the plant. They just make it look differently.
So cosmetic, not much more than that. But know that that's what's causing that problem, as opposed to, say, a nutrient deficiency or what have you. This is the work of those bugs.
Right, and if somebody has questions, they can contact their county extension office. They're open. And if those people have questions, they'll probably contact me, bring in a branch or take a picture and then send it, and make sure it is an insect gall, because there are diseases that might resemble these galls caused by insects or mites.
And as you bring up, Extension stands ready to answer, Raymond, any questions that a homeowner or gardener might have about insects at work in their various venues, right?
Yes, we have our newsletter, which comes out weekly. We have a wide diversity of fact sheets, and we have some personnel that are here to address questions regarding insect or mite pests or arthropods, Eric.
Raymond, always a pleasure. Thanks for touching base with us.
Always enjoy it, Eric. Look forward to our next visit talking about bugs.
Raymond Cloyd, horticultural entomologist, K-State Research and Extension, and that is this week's horticulture segment. Thanks to you for being along with us, and we welcome you right back here this same time tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.